Hello listeners, and welcome to the Montel Weekly Podcast, bring you energy matters in an informal setting. In today's pod, we turn again to the gas market. Wholesale prices are falling after a very choppy summer and autumn, but there's little room for complacency for the winter. Demand will pick up, gas storage will need topping up, and we will need to keep attracting LNG. Helping me, Richard Sverrisson, to discuss the outlook for the winter in terms of gas supply, demand, and wholesale prices is my very knowledgeable colleague, Andrés Cala. A warm welcome to you, Andrés.
Thank you very much. Always a pleasure to talk some gas.
Good stuff. Well, let's start. And starting us off is the topic of the Australian strike, Andrés. I'm hearing the Australian strike is back on. What's happening?
Well, only a week ago, the unions were saying that Chevron had delivered a contract that was not including all the terms that had been agreed upon in the broker deal with the work regulator in Australia. And they had warned, they had specifically said, unless Chevron gives us back or turns back the contract with the proper terms, then we're going to go back on strike. And today, late on Thursday, this happened.
Wow. And what's been the reaction so far?
Well, the market reaction has been muted so far, and partly that could be explained. Analysts told us that because for a number of reasons. One, that beforehand, in the first part of the strike, there was no impact to supply. Thus, the market is relaxed, that at this stage, it's going to have little impact. Two, we're well supplied in Europe. We have floating storage all over the place. So even if there were an immediate impact, it would not necessarily affect European balance. And it goes also back to the timing. The announcement today was that they would officially notify Chevron and the regulator, the workplace regulator, about the strike on Monday. And after that, we have 7 working days, which gives us more or less, if everything goes according to plan, the strike wouldn't start until the 19th, October 19th. So it gives us quite a bit of time.
So there's still a little bit of time for horse trading and for reaching a deal. So it's not, they haven't announced when they will actually commence industrial action, have they?
No, until Monday, we won't know when exactly and how that strike would look, because every time they give notice on industrial action, they also give the terms of that of whatever that industrial action may be. So we don't know if it's going to be a few hours or a complete stoppage, back to a complete stoppage. We still don't know that, but on Monday we should be able to find that out.
Okay, so the details have yet to be released, and I think we can safely say, can't we, to the listeners that they need to be following this very closely on Montel News. Now, the other thing, I mean, you know, the Australian strike was the big story of the summer, wasn't it? I mean, could you summarize it in a nutshell for us, Andrés? What was happening and why did it have such a big effect?
Well, what happened was that one platform of unions. It actually involves 2 unions. They demanded that their contracts be updated to similar terms that other offshore workers have in Australia. And they went first against Woodside in Australia's biggest LNG plant. They did come to an agreement in that case. What analysts would tell us or told us at that moment is that, well, Woodside is a local and they know how to play the game, and they came to an agreement quite quickly without any industrial action. But then when it came to Chevron, that's when we actually had the only industrial action. It started about, if I remember correctly, on September 7th, and it was but it was a soft strike. It was just only a few hours a day, and then it lasted for a week, and the strike action, the industrial action intensified. They moved into a few hours, and in fact, 10 hours a day, 11 hours a day. But there was no impact on output. partly because Chevron brought in workers from, well, all over the place. As far as we know, they even brought workers in from the United States to work in the Australia, although that's not completely confirmed. But it cost no impact. There was no effect on European supply or even on Asian supply, and it was easily managed. However, as we said earlier, Chevron now apparently renegated on the terms, and now they're as one analyst told us, it's back to square one.
I mean, the market, perhaps it could be said overreacted in the time when the news broke in over the summer, but the question remains. We'll wait until next week until we see how this develops further. We're maybe not likely to see price moves in a similar way. Would that be a fair assumption here, Andrés?
I think so, especially because we've had the experience over summer about what these scripted strikes actually mean. There's a lot of posturing, both from the companies, but also from workers, and they almost take a scripted approach to this. Take for example the fact that they announce a strike, but only after 7 working days. That if nothing else is just a pressure point, and it's a message to the other side saying, let's reach a deal, otherwise we're going on strike.
Absolutely. I mean, that's very interesting that you mentioned the Japan Korea marker, the JKM, versus what we say the title transfer facility price, the TTF price in Europe, and how they reacted in very different directions. Do you think the European price moves were an overreaction, Andrés?
What is happening, especially this year, is that JKM, Asian LNG prices, are tracking TTF. It used to be the other way around, of course, when we were a sink, when Europe was a sink, when LNG just ended up here if it didn't find a home anywhere else in Europe. But now it's the other way around. So Asia has, throughout the strike process, maintained and sustained an arbitrage. So the arbitrage, and for that matter, still favoring Asia, actually now even more so than during the strikes. But it was precisely because of European or TTF. It's growing volatility, obviously.
And do you think? You mentioned the supply to Europe. We've seen kind of numbers, the imports of gas into the EU fall off a bit in recent weeks. Do you expect this to continue?
Word on the market, and of course,
exactly.
who could ultimately confirm it? Won't. But
in terms of what are you hearing out there? What are your the analysts, the experts that you speak to on a daily basis? They must have some views on this.
Sure. We can only. It's as easy as looking at the facts. For some reason, Algerian supply to Italy is also down. Norwegian supply could also be a lot higher. We know that, but yet it's still being contained. So what is happening? Well, a lot of the analysts what they're telling us, and traders, participants are directly telling us that the Norwegians and Algerians and producers in general, they're optimizing their supply for what end? Well, to support prices, and we have what's also happening. It's very much related to the contango we have now. Contango, of course, is when prompt prices are lower than forward prices, and it was narrowing for a bit, but now it's back to widening. And what is that the price signals that gives to Norway or Algeria is keep it for now, sell it later. So this is although there is no confirmation of this is what participants believe is happening.
So I mean, you mentioned the contango in prices. We've fallen back to around 45 or below 45 euros a megawatt hour, these are for the forward contracts anyway. These are, they're much lower than what we've seen, of course, but they are historically, in a historic perspective, they're high at least, aren't they? What are you hearing? Is this a kind of could they drop even lower ahead of winter? Of course, we're going to maybe discuss the other drivers out there, but what do you think are the main things that people should look out for going forward?
There are always risks, but obviously it's going to be Norway. That's the number one thing. LNG imports, for example, this week, they're going to hit their highest since middle of May, from earlier this year. Why? Because of the contango. We have a whole bunch of floating storage just waiting to, get the extra buck from Europe, and that's just pushing up LNG imports. So that's one to watch. But as I said, Norway is, of course, the key one to watch. Will they increase supply for the rest of the month, or will they play out the contango as many others are doing? Of course, and there's also the very prompt prices versus the front month contract. As you mentioned, we're around 40, 45, but the day ahead, we're around 30. I mean, that's a huge price difference that obviously players are keen to get some profit from.
Yeah, and the weather is going to be crucial here, and we can't. Neither you nor I, Andrés, are meteorologists or weather experts. All I know is that a seasonal forecast is very, very difficult to predict. Anything past 10 days is very uncertain. But of course, Europe was saved, as the saying goes, we were saved, as we've said many times on this podcast before, was saved by a very mild winter last year. Now, what are you hearing? I mean, we're in, nearing mid-October. Temperatures are still very mild. What are you hearing from any sort of meteorologists or weather forecasters that you speak to?
Well, in terms of meteorology, we have one key factor. I think there's one key factor to watch in terms of gas markets, of course, and that's El Nino. Because El Nino will make the winter in Asia a lot milder, which means that we will have more LNG available. I mean, the key to the markets, of course, is what happens when winter comes. Regardless if we have a beast of the east or not, it's going to get colder and demand is going to go up. No matter we know that much. So the question is, will we get to the point where Asia and Europe compete for that fuel, for the last molecule? And that's where when you see the real effects, the real consequences of everything we're talking about. So weather-wise, there's El Nino to consider. That's going to be mild. But how Europe will cope with if there is a cold season in both basins, both the Pacific and the Atlantic, that's the main question. We're still long. We're still long. Technically, theoretically, we're long on gas. Norway can export more. Algeria can export more. We're getting very healthy supplies from Azerbaijan. We still have the big question mark of Russia, of course, at all times. But LNG supply is also very good, and Asia is not apparently taken in mostly contracted volumes, leaving most of the spot for Europe. So if you put it all together, it's a pretty comfortable situation. Can we relax? No, of course not. We can't relax because there might be a disruption again, and eventually there will be a disruption, or Russia might choose to cut LNG supplies, or they might choose to sanction Naftogaz in Ukraine as they have threatened to do, and all that would have consequences on the balance. So we're long. Theoretically, to point that out again, but we certainly can't relax, not at any moment.
No, absolutely. This is what I warned about in the or mentioned in the intro, that I think that we still can't be complacent. I think that's one thing what the last 2 or 3 years have taught us, that complacency is not a factor that or an element that we should be bringing into discussion here. But if I can. It's also, you mentioned Russia here, Andrés, and I think it's still quite fascinating. And I think that's often quite forgotten that, in terms of a lot of the bans on commodities coming from Russia is still an important supplier of LNG, and even it's making money through piping gas through the Ukraine, isn't it? I mean, that's often not talked about.
And the question we don't know, and nobody knows, precise, only the president of Russia knows, Vladimir Putin, of course, is what they choose to do amid a war. At the end of the day, one of the options participants have talked to me about is, what if they choose to sanction the LNG coming into Europe? There's most of our gas, Russian gas, coming into Europe is LNG. It's term contracts to Total from France, to Naturgy from Spain. There are a lot of it is contracted volume, or most of it is contracted volume. So what if Russia wanted to hurt Europe again, as it has in the past, as it has tried in any case? That would be one way to go, and they certainly have enough customers in Asia. So.
And they have form in terms of the way the gas was cut off from August 2021 until early or the Q1 of 2022. So it's not inconceivable that could happen in terms of LNG flows. I think that's quite an interesting that they suddenly just stop the flows or don't honor those contracts, those long-term contracts that Andrés. That's a very, very interesting point. But you also mentioned Asian supply, and in terms of, so the Asian demand in terms of La Nina, and if there's a mild weather in Northeast Asia, the demand, this LNG competition between Northeast Asia and Europe will not be that fierce.
Obviously, El Nino will be one of those effects, but we have it also. Asia is going to be long as well, as at least that's what we expect. And of course, weather contingent, but because of nuclear generation, nuclear generation in Japan, it's about 40% higher year on year, winter on winter. It's about 40% higher, and that's equivalent to around 15 cargoes that are going to be freed up, and 50 cargoes means everything to Europe. That's just Japan. South Korea is in a very similar situation. Their nuclear generation is also contributing to diminish the LNG imports. China is obviously economically, even though their imports are increasing year on year, it's nowhere close to what we expected. And most of it, there are term contracts as well. So, emerging Asian countries, they're very price sensitive, and prices at the beginning of winter, because of course this is the beginning of the gas year as well. These prices are too high for Pakistan, for Bangladesh, even for Thailand. So we're seeing less demand coming from Asia, and that's even without considering the risk of a mild winter in Asia, or the expectations of a mild winter in Asia. So Europe will be getting its pick, at least for now, and we have the capacity, the extra capacity, which is also a huge difference from last year when we didn't have the capacity to bring in as much as we needed. So Europe will be able to import to balance its gas system, even if we have a very cold winter. But again, there's no room for complacency, because what happens if any of the other risks materialize, whether it's Russia, whether it's a very, very strong winter on both basins at the same time, maybe Norway ends up, or Algeria have a big disruption. If anything, what we have learned in the last 3 years is that expect the unexpected.
No, very, very, absolutely. I think that's a very good point. I think there are other aspects, maybe a bit closer to home, that are also very important here. And I'm thinking of the French nuclear fleet. I mean, we've seen often in past years they've struggled to supply the European wholesale market with electricity in terms of what they've done before, and there are some issues. There's issues of corrosion, and the fleet is aging. I mean, is that also, when you speak to people, is this kind of also a concern that people are talking about?
Huge. France and its nuclear generation is one of the main drivers, almost as much as weather, isn't it? I think the people or participants are more relaxed, at least what we're getting from French nuclear generation forecast is that, it will remain an exporter throughout the winter, barring any surprise. But so that they're pretty comfortable. Participants are pretty comfortable, and it's more manageable, certainly. That's just one of the things. So another big question for me and for participants, naturally, is whether our LDZ, in other words, our household consumption, how that will react. We know industrial demand is being subdued just because of prices, because of everything that's going on in the global economy. But what about how citizens will behave if there's a cold winter, a very cold winter? We don't know, and prices are down, but that's not good if we're just going to end up reigniting a lot of the demand that we've managed to contain so far. Or even without a cold winter, we've already seen traces of this. The speed at which heat pumps are being installed has tapered off. It's coming down now, and it might just be a coincidence, but it could also be a sign that not just citizens but even governments are. Yeah, they're relaxing a little too much in their objectives, because efficiency is going to be a very important aspect for anything of the gas markets.
We talked a little bit about this in the previous week's episode, and I think in terms of a sort of rollback of green policies and installing heat pumps or replacing gas boilers with heat pumps was one of the areas where several European countries are looking at the costs or looking at the populist backlash, and are deciding against that for whatever reason. But certainly that would be a factor. And, like you said, domestic prices are very high still, even though they are falling. I think that needs to be, and we are still in a cost of living crisis. Inflationary pressure is huge. Food prices, energy prices. We're still not completely. I'd say we're very far from being out of the woods. But if a key fundamental factor here as well, Andrés, is the storage and stocks levels in Europe, and I think we're now quite healthy, aren't we? That's at least a ray of light here.
Sure. Well, that's until we get a big winter storm. We know also that storages are depleted very fast when it's cold, obviously. There is a caveat to that, and that's LNG. Why? Because the economics, and in part it's due to contango, the economics make it a lot more affordable to increase LNG send out than to withdraw from storage. So what the market expects will happen in this winter is that we're going to get as much LNG as we can to preserve our storage. And we could have, depending on what happens, of course, we could have a very comfortable start to next spring, as we did this year, depending on the levels. But I think storages are, the main concern, and I'll cite you one of the predictions from ICES in this case. If we have a strong winter in both basins, we're 95% now, but we're going to drop to 12%, and that's below the 5-year average. So no, there's still that risk for sure there, and that's of course that's a perfect storm scenario. But the thing is, that we could have, at some point, we will have a perfect storm. It's a question of when, not anything else. Yeah,
and being prepared for it. I mean, when you have other factors like, what's happening with maintenance on the Norwegian continental shelf, we haven't seen that level of outages or unplanned outages for quite some time. Have they surprised you?
No, not in the sense that we postponed them, didn't we? Because we were in the middle of a war and we needed all that gas at that point. But this is going to come back and bite us. And this is what Norwegian supply is not going to be able to sustain the levels that it had in the the last couple of years, eventually it will have to come down just over depletion. Although obviously there are discoveries and everything, but forced maintenance is a big issue. And I'll cite you another example, and that's again going back to Russia. It might not be voluntary, but Russian LNG exports could seriously come down because because of sanctions. They don't have the manpower, the knowledge, or the parts, especially, to replace a lot of the components in machines that were built by Western by Western players. So what we do know so far is that they've managed to sustain it, cutting back on a lot of the infrastructural improvements they had to do. So they've managed to hold the beast down, so to speak. But this is eventually going to bite us. Eventually, Jamal exports in at least two of its strains, they're expected to come down because the maintenance, they haven't had the maintenance that they required. In this case, because of sanctions.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So LNG flows from Russia could Russia could decide to just stop them, or they will be stopped because they involuntary, if you like, because they can't do the maintenance that's required, or something will just give and they will stop. But that's very interesting. So yeah, I mean, Andrés, thank you very much for being a guest on the Montel Weekly podcast. There's lots to keep in mind, and I know that you will be covering all of these factors and all these issues and all the outlook and the forecast for the coming winter on Montel News.
For sure, and always a pleasure.